What if everything you think you know about civilization is only half the story? What if progress didn't always mean improvement and survival came with a hidden cost? For 300,000 years, humans struggled in darkness until one moment changed everything: fire, words, memory. From that moment, we built cities, gods, empires, and weapons powerful enough to end ourselves. This is not a story of dates and kings. This is the story of choices, brilliant, brutal, and deeply human. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may never see civilization the same way again. We'll explain everything in this video, step by step. Don't skip it. Before there were nations, before borders, before gods were carved in stone or laws written on paper, there was a human being standing beneath the open sky, asking the oldest question of all: how do we survive? That question is the beginning of civilization. Not in a palace, not in a throne room, but in fear, hope, hunger, and imagination. The first fire, for nearly 300,000 years, humanity lived without cities, without writing, without history as we know it. Our ancestors were wanderers, fragile bodies in a dangerous world, armed with little more than stone tools and shared stories. Fire changed everything. It pushed back the darkness. It turned raw food into nourishment. It gathered people together. Around fire, language grew. Around language, memory formed. And memory is where civilization begins. The agricultural revolution, humanity settles down. Then came a quiet revolution, one without armies or speeches. Humans learned to plant seeds. Farming tied us to the land, and the land tied us to each other. Villages emerged. Families grew. Surplus food allowed specialization: farmers, builders, priests, leaders. But abundance brought hierarchy. Ownership created conflict, and the idea of mine was born. Civilization offered security, but at a cost. The first cities and the birth of power in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The world's first cities rose: Uruk, Babylon, streets, walls, temples, and laws. For the first time, human behavior was written down, not just remembered. Justice became something declared by rulers, not negotiated by neighbors. Kings claimed divine authority. Gods were organized. Time was measured. Civilization was no longer just survival. It was control. Egypt, China, and the idea of eternity. Along the Nile, Egyptians built monuments meant to defy death itself. Pharaohs ruled as living gods. The afterlife became a national project. In China, dynasties rose and fell under the concept of the mandate of heaven, the belief that power must be earned by virtue, not just inherited. Here, civilization learned a vital lesson. Authority lasts only as long as it serves order and meaning. When rulers failed, history moved on, often violently, ideas that changed the world. Then something extraordinary happened. Humans began asking not just how to live, but why. In India, thinkers questioned suffering and desire. In Greece, philosophers debated reason, ethics, and democracy. In Israel, prophets demanded moral responsibility from kings. In China, Confucius taught harmony, duty, and restraint. These ideas still shape us. Empires collapse. Ideas endure. Empire, glory, and brutality. Rome unified millions under law, roads, and citizenship, while enslaving countless others. Persia ruled through tolerance. The Mauryan Empire governed with compassion under Ashoka. The Islamic Golden Age preserved knowledge when Europe forgot it. Empires brought order, but also conquest. Every empire told the same story: we bring civilization. And history keeps asking, at what cost? Faith, power in the medieval world. After Rome fell, the world fractured. Kings ruled by sword. The church ruled by faith. Yet monasteries preserved learning. Scholars translated ancient texts. Trade connected continents. Civilization did not vanish, it adapted. Even in darkness, humanity carried a candle forward. The age of exploration, the world collides. Then came ships. Europe reached outward, and the world was never the same. New lands were discovered, but so were new horrors. Indigenous civilizations were destroyed. Slavery became global. Wealth flowed one direction. Civilization expanded. While humanity fractured, progress and cruelty walked hand in hand. Revolutions, power challenged. Eventually, people spoke back. The American Revolution claimed liberty. The French Revolution demanded equality. The Haitian Revolution shattered slavery itself. For the first time, civilization was no longer the property of kings. It belonged, at least in theory, to the people. Industry, war, and the modern world. Machines transformed life. Cities exploded in size. Empires industrialized violence. The 20th century gave us miracles and mass death, world wars, genocide, nuclear fire. Civilization reached its most advanced and most dangerous point. We could now end ourselves, the ongoing story, and yet here we are, still telling stories, still building, still struggling to live up to our ideals. Civilization is not monuments or machines. It is a moral experiment. Every generation inherits the same question. Will we use our power to dominate or to understand? History offers no final verdict, only reminders that civilization is fragile, that progress is not permanent, that humanity's greatest achievement is not what we build, but whether we remember why we build it at all, because in the end, civilization is not written in stone. It is written in choices. And the story is still being told, long before there were nations, long before borders were drawn or histories recorded. There was a small group of humans gathered in the darkness, listening to the crackle of fire. The flame was unsteady, alive, dangerous, and miraculous all at once. It did not simply provide warmth or protection from predators. Fire changed the rhythm of human life. It extended the day beyond sunset, turning night into a shared space rather than a time of fear. Around fire, human beings lingered. They stayed awake longer. They watched one another's faces. They learned to wait, to plan, to imagine tomorrow. Survival was no longer only about reaction. It became about anticipation. Fire reshaped the human body as much as the human mind. Cooked food softened, releasing more energy, allowing brains to grow larger while jaws grew smaller. Over generations, this transformation altered not just anatomy, but thought itself. A larger brain made room for memory, abstraction, and empathy. The fire was not merely a tool, it was a T. Share. It taught patience, caution, cooperation. One careless moment could burn everything. One shared effort could keep everyone alive. In this fragile balance, humanity began to understand responsibility, even before it had a word for it. As people gathered around the flame, sound began to matter. Early communication was likely made of gestures, cries, and rhythms, but fire changed the environment of communication. Faces were visible, hands could point. The same stories could be repeated night after night. Sounds turned into patterns, and patterns turned into meaning. Language did not arrive fully formed. It grew slowly, shaped by need. Words were tools for warning, for teaching, for remembering where the water was, which berries killed, which paths led home. Language bound individuals into groups, and groups into something more enduring than a single lifetime. With language came memory, and with memory came identity. A group could now remember its dead, recall its journeys, and pass knowledge to children who had not lived those experiences themselves. This was a revolution as profound as fire itself. Survival no longer depended solely on personal experience. It depended on inherited wisdom. A child could begin life already knowing what had taken generations to learn. Memory stretched time. It allowed the past to live inside the present, and in doing so, it created the first sense of history. Stories emerged naturally from this union of fire and language. At first, they were practical. They explained how to hunt, where danger waited, why cooperation mattered. But gradually, stories took on deeper meaning. They explained the sky, the animals, the seasons, and eventually, the mystery of death. When someone did not return to the circle of light, language tried to make sense of absence. Stories offered continuity where life seemed to break. They transformed fear into meaning and loss into memory. Through stories, the dead were not gone. They were remembered, and remembrance became a form of survival. These shared narratives did something extraordinary. They created trust among people who were not related by blood. When a group believes the same story, follows the same spoken rules, and remembers the same past, cooperation becomes possible on a larger scale. This was the beginning of society, not enforced by law or written authority, but by shared understanding. Fire made gathering possible. Language made cooperation possible. Memory made continuity possible. Together, they formed the invisible foundation of civilization. As generations passed, these early human groups began to see themselves as distinct from others. Accents changed, stories diverged, memories shaped identity. A group knew who it was by the stories it told and the fire around which it gathered. Culture was born not in monuments, but in repetition, the same gestures, the same words, the same stories told again and again until they felt timeless. What we now call tradition began a survival mechanism, a way to preserve what worked in a world that could turn deadly without warning. Fire also introduced hierarchy. Someone had to tend it. Someone had to know how to make it. Knowledge became power, not through domination, but through dependence. Those who understood fire and language deeply became teachers, elders, guides. Authority was not yet enforced by violence or wealth. It was earned through memory and wisdom. The first leaders were not kings. They were storytellers and keepers of knowledge, trusted because they remembered what others could not. Over time, the circle around the fire grew larger and the stories more complex. Language allowed humans to imagine things that did not yet exist. Plans could be made. Promises could be kept. Cooperation could extend across seasons, even years. This ability to imagine a shared future is what truly separates human civilization from mere animal survival. Fire anchored the body. Language expanded the mind. Memory linked generations. Together, they allowed humanity to think beyond the present moment. In this early world, morality began to form, not as written law, but as expectation. Stories praised bravery, condemned betrayal, warned against selfishness. These moral lessons were remembered because they were told, and they were told because they mattered. Civilization did not begin with rules carved in stone. It began with lessons whispered by firelight, carried from one mind to another, shaping behavior. Rough shared values rather than force. The fragile nature of fire mirrored the fragile nature of early human society. A storm could extinguish it. Neglect could destroy it. The same was true of trust, language, and memory. Forgetting was dangerous. Silence could be fatal. To lose a story was to lose knowledge. To lose knowledge was to risk death. Civilization, at its earliest stage, depended on remembering together. This collective remembering was humanity's first great achievement, more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any structure built of stone. As humans spread across continents, fire traveled with them. So did language, evolving into countless forms. So did memory, adapting to new landscapes, new challenges, new ways of life. Every later civilization, no matter how advanced, rests on this ancient foundation. Cities, laws, religions, and empires all trace their origins back to that moment when humans first sat together in the light, speaking, remembering, and choosing cooperation over isolation. In that simple act, keeping a fire alive, sharing words, passing memory forward, humanity stepped out of mere existence and into history. For most of human existence, movement was life. People followed animals, seasons, and water, carrying everything they owned on their backs and everything they knew in their memories. The land was not owned, it was shared, feared, respected. Survival depended on flexibility and awareness. Then, slowly and almost accidentally, humans began to stay. Seeds dropped near campsites. Plants grew where people returned. Observation turned into intention. Intention turned into agriculture. In choosing to plant rather than wander, humanity made one of the most consequential decisions in its history. Farming promised stability. Food could be grown, stored, counted. The future became something that could be planned rather than endured. Children could be raised in one place. Shelters became permanent. Villages formed, rooted in soil and season. This change felt like progress, and in many ways it was. Fewer people starved. Communities grew larger. Skills diversified. Some farmed, others built, others prayed, others led. Human life became more complex, more interconnected, more productive. But agriculture did something deeper than change how humans ate. It changed how they thought about time, land, and one another. When people stayed in one place, land gained value. Not symbolic value, but material importance. Fields represented survival, effort, and future security. The idea of territory hardened. Boundaries emerged. What had once been shared, space became defined and defended. With that shift came the earliest form of ownership. And with ownership came inequality. Surplus food made hierarchy possible. When there was more than enough, someone decided who received it. Storage required protection. Protection required authority. Authority required justification. Those who controlled food controlled people. Leadership, NCE, based on wisdom and memory, increasingly rested on power and force. The gap between those who worked the land and those who governed it began to widen, quietly but decisively, as villages expanded into towns, towns into cities. Power concentrated. Walls were built not just to keep enemies out, but to keep order in. Record keeping emerged to track grain, labor, and debt. Writing did not begin as poetry or philosophy. It began as accounting. Civilization learned to count before it learned to question. Numbers replaced trust. Tablets replaced memory. Control became systematic. Cities brought extraordinary achievements. Architecture rose skyward. Irrigation systems reshaped rivers. Trade connected distant peoples. Ideas traveled faster. Culture flourished. Yet cities also magnified human suffering. Disease spread quickly. Poverty became visible. Labor became relentless. For the first time, large numbers of people lived lives of continuous work with little freedom to leave. The land that once offered movement now demanded obedience. Agriculture tied humans to cycles beyond their control. Droughts meant famine. Floods meant ruin. When crops failed, entire societies trembled. To explain this vulnerability, people turned to gods. Rituals emerged to ensure rain, fertility, and harvest. Religion intertwined with power. Rulers claimed divine favor. Temples stored grain. Priests interpreted disaster. Belief became a tool for stability and for control, offering comfort while reinforcing hierarchy. The agricultural world also reshaped family structures. Children became labor. Large families became economic assets. Gender roles hardened as work divided along physical and social lines. In many societies, men controlled land and law, while women's labor remained essential but undervalued. Inequality embedded itself not only between classes but within households. These patterns were not inevitable, but they became normalized through repetition and tradition. War, too, changed its nature. Nomadic conflicts had been brief, often resolved by movement. Agricultural societies fought for land, water, and storage. Battles became more destructive. Victory meant possession, not escape. Defeat meant enslavement or death. Standing armies emerged to defend fields and cities. Violence became institutionalized, planned, and justified as necessary for survival and expansion. Yet even as inequality grew, so did cooperation on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of people could now work together toward shared goals. Roads were built, laws were enforced, cultural identities solidified. Civilization offered belonging, structure, and meaning. People knew where they fit in the world, even if that place was unequal. Stability for many felt preferable to freedom without security. Over generations, inequality ceased to feel new. It felt natural. Children were born into status they did not choose. Power inherited itself. Kings claimed bloodlines. Elites told stories that explained why the world must be this way. Civilization learned how to justify imbalance, turning social arrangements into moral orders. What began as practical organization hardened into destiny. Still, resistance never disappeared. Peasants rebelled. Prophets spoke against excess. Philosophers questioned ownership. Every agricultural civilization carried within it both the promise of order and the tension of injustice. The same fields that fed millions reminded them daily of who owned the land and who did not. Progress and suffering became inseparable companions. As cities dominated the landscape, humanity moved further from the rhythms that once governed life. Nature became something to control rather than adapt to. Forests were cleared, rivers redirected, animals domesticated. The world was reshaped to fit human need, but the cost was often unseen until it was irreversible. Soil eroded, ecosystems collapsed. The land that had given security now demanded increasing effort to sustain itself. Agriculture gave humanity time to think, build, and remember, but it also trapped humanity in systems that rewarded accumulation over balance. Civilization grew taller, stronger, more impressive, and more fragile. A single bad harvest could undo decades of growth. A corrupt ruler could starve thousands. Complexity amplified both success and failure. This second great turning point in human history did not simply create civilization. It defined its contradictions. From the moment humans planted seeds and settled down, they gained the power to shape the world and the burden of managing inequality, authority, and dependence. Cities rose from the soil, fed by the labor of many and governed by the few, carrying forward a structure that would echo through every empire, kingdom, and modern nation that followed. As civilizations grew larger and more complex, power alone was never enough to hold them together. Armies could conquer land, walls could defend cities, and laws could enforce order. But none of these could explain why people should obey, sacrifice, or endure suffering. For that, societies needed meaning. Ideas filled the space that force could not. Beliefs shaped loyalty. Values shaped behavior. Long before empires learned how to rule bodies, ideas learned how to rule minds. In the ancient world, people began to look beyond survival and ask deeper questions about existence. Why is there suffering? What is justice? What is a good life? These questions arose independently in different parts of the world, shaped by local conditions, but bound by shared human uncertainty. In India, thinkers reflected on the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. seeking liberation from suffering through discipline and compassion. In China, philosophers emphasized harmony, duty, and balance, arguing that social order depended on moral behavior rather than brute force. In the Mediterranean, Greek thinkers elevated reason, debate, and inquiry, daring to believe that truth could be discovered through thought rather than revelation alone. These ideas did not remain abstract. They entered daily life. They shaped family roles, political systems, and concepts of justice. They told people how to treat one another and what to expect from authority. A ruler could command obedience through fear, but legitimacy required belief. When people believed that order reflected a higher moral truth, they accepted hierarchy more willingly. When belief collapsed, power followed soon after. Religion emerged not simply as worship, but as structure. It organized time through calendars and rituals. It organized space through sacred places. It organized behavior through moral codes. In many civilizations, religion became inseparable from governance. Kings ruled by divine mandate. Laws were said to come from gods. Obedience was framed not just as civic duty, but as spiritual necessity. Faith stabilized societies by linking personal meaning to collective order. Yet belief was never static. Ideas traveled along trade routes across deserts and seas. They mixed, adapted, and challenged one another. When Buddhism spread beyond India, it transformed as it encountered new cultures. When Greek philosophy met Roman pragmatism, it reshaped law and governance. When monotheistic faiths emerged, they redefined humanity's relationship with power, insisting that moral authority could stand above kings rather than serve them. This was a radical shift. If law came from a higher moral source, errors could be judged, prophets could challenge kings, conscience could outweigh command. These ideas planted the seeds of resistance within civilization itself. Even the most powerful empires found themselves confronted not by armies, but by beliefs that refused to submit. Empires rose and fell with astonishing speed, but ideas endured. The Assyrian Empire collapsed. Babylon faded. Rome fractured. Yet the philosophies, legal principles, and moral concepts they encountered survived them. Stoic ideas about duty and restraint influenced later Christian ethics. Roman law shaped future legal systems long after Roman legions vanished. Confucian thought guided Chinese governance across centuries of dynastic change. Power proved temporary. Ideas proved resilient. Ideas also created boundaries. They defined who belonged and who did not. Shared beliefs forged identity. Language, ritual, and story distinguished one group from another. Civilization was not just built with stone and labor, but with shared imagination. People were willing to fight and die, not merely for land, but for ideas about honor, destiny, and truth. Wars were no longer only about resources. They became struggles over meaning. At times, ideas softened power. Concepts of mercy, charity, and justice placed limits on cruelty. Moral teachings urged compassion toward the weak and restraint toward the strong. Even when imperfectly applied, these ideas shaped expectations. A ruler who ruled without mercy risked rebellion and just politically, but morally. Civilization learned to judge itself by its own ideals, even when it failed to meet them. At other times, ideas intensified violence. When belief hardened into certainty, tolerance disappeared. Crusades, inquisitions, holy wars, and ideological purges revealed the dark side of meaning. When people believed they possessed absolute truth, compromise became betrayal. Ideas could inspire greatness or justify atrocity, often at the same time. Civilization advanced not only through technology and organization, but through struggles over belief itself. Philosophy gradually separated from religion in some societies, opening space for secular ideas about governance. Thinkers began to argue that authority derived from consent, not divinity. Reason and evidence challenged tradition. These ideas were dangerous. They threatened established hierarchies. Yet they spread because they resonated with lived experience. People who suffered under unjust systems found language to articulate their grievances. Ideas gave shape to dissent. Printing accelerated this process. Knowledge could now move faster than armies. Literacy expanded access to ideas once confined to elites. A single pamphlet could challenge a throne. A single book could ignite a movement. Civilization entered an age where control of information became as important as control of land. Power learned to fear ideas precisely because it could not fully contain them. Even in the modern world, where technology dominates daily life, ideas remain decisive. Nations define themselves by constitutions, principles, and shared narratives. Revolutions erupt not simply from hunger, but from belief that injustice is intolerable. Rights exist first as ideas before they become laws. Progress begins as imagination. Decline begins when societies stop believing in their own values. Civilizations that endure are not those with the largest armies or the greatest wealth, but those whose ideas can adapt without losing their moral center. When belief systems become rigid, they break under pressure. When they evolve while preserving core human dignity, they guide societies through change. History shows again and again that ideas outlive rulers, survive destruction, and quietly shape the future long after empires are reduced to ruins. From the earliest myths told by firelight to the philosophical debates of modern democracies, ideas have carried civilization forward, giving people reasons to cooperate, to obey, to resist, and to hope. They have defined what it means to be human within society, shaping not only institutions but inner lives, determining how individuals understand themselves and their place in the world. Human history is often told as a march forward, a steady climb from darkness into light, from ignorance to knowledge, from weakness to power. Yet beneath every triumph lies a shadow, and beside every breakthrough walks a consequence. Progress has never traveled alone. From the moment humans learned to shape tools and organize, society's advancement and violence began moving together, intertwined in ways both subtle and brutal. The earliest technologies were created to survive, but they were also created to dominate. A sharper stone cut meat more efficiently, but it also cut flesh more easily. Tools that helped humans hunt animals soon helped them hunt one another. As communities grew, so did competition. Progress meant advantage, and advantage meant power. Those who possessed better tools, stronger organization, or deeper knowledge gained control over those who did not. Violence became not just an instinct, but a strategy. As societies advanced, violence grew more organized. Agriculture fed armies, cities produced weapons, bureaucracy enabled coordination. War was no longer spontaneous or personal. It became planned, justified, and ritualized. Progress allowed humans to kill more efficiently and at greater distance, turning conflict into an abstract exercise managed by leaders far from the battlefield. The individual victim disappeared into numbers while victory became a statistic. Empires were built on this partnership between progress and force. Roads that carried trade also carried legions. Engineering that raised aqueducts also raised siege engines. Law that promised order also enforced obedience. Empire builders spoke of peace and stability, but peace was achieved through conquest and stability through fear. Civilization expanded outward. Leaving behind monuments and mass graves in equal measure, even cultural and intellectual progress carried violent implications. Writing preserved knowledge, but it also recorded ownership, debt, and punishment. Mathematics enabled architecture and astronomy, but also logistics for war. Navigation opened oceans for trade and exploration, but also enabled invasion, enslavement, and extraction. Each leap forward widened humanity's reach while deepening its capacity for harm. The age of exploration revealed this pattern on a global scale. Advances in shipbuilding, navigation, and weaponry connected continents that had evolved separately for millennia. The encounter was framed as discovery, but for millions it was catastrophe. Indigenous civilizations were dismantled by disease, steel, and ideology. Progress for some meant annihilation for others. Violence was no longer confined by geography. It became global, systemic, and justified by belief in superiority and destiny. Industrialization intensified the relationship between progress and destruction. Machines multiplied human labor, but they also multiplied suffering. Factories produced goods faster than ever, while workers lived shorter, harsher lives. Wealth accumulated rapidly, but unevenly. Cities expanded, choking with pollution and poverty. At the same time, industrial efficiency transformed warfare. Mass production turned weapons into commodities. Death became scalable. The world wars of the 20th century exposed to a full cost of unchecked progress. Science and industry reached heights never imagined, and so did their destructive potential. Trenches filled with bodies, cities burned from the sky, genocide was organized with chilling efficiency. Technology promised a better future while delivering unprecedented horror. Civilization proved capable of brilliance and barbarism at the same moment. Even medicine, one of humanity's greatest achievements, developed alongside violence. Advances that saved lives on one front were refined on another. Wartime necessity accelerated innovation. Surgery improved because wounds demanded it. Psychology advanced because trauma was widespread. Progress fed on crisis, and crisis fed on progress, blurring the line between healing and harm. After the devastation, humanity vowed never again, yet the cycle continued. Nuclear weapons emerged from scientific triumph, holding the power to end civilization itself. Knowledge reached a point where survival depended not on further progress, but on restraint. The same intelligence that unlocked the secrets of the universe created the means for total annihilation. Civilization stood on a knife's edge, protected and threatened by its own achievements. In daily life, this tension persists. Communication technology connects billions, but spreads hatred just as quickly as understanding. Surveillance promises security while eroding privacy. Economic systems generate abundance while deepening inequality. Progress solves problems while creating new ones, often faster than societies can respond. Violence adapts, shifting from physical to psychological, from visible to invisible, from battlefield to algorithm. History shows that violence does not always announce itself with weapons. It appears in exploitation, in forced labor, in systemic injustice. It hides within structures designed for efficiency and growth. Progress can mask harm behind complexity, allowing suffering to persist without a single villain. Responsibility diffuses, accountability fades. Civilization advances while individuals feel increasingly powerless within it. Yet progress also fuels resistance. The same tools that enable control enable dissent. Ideas spread faster. Injustice is documented. Voices once silenced find platforms. Violence is exposed as often as it is enacted. This duality defines modern civilization. Every innovation holds the potential to liberate or to dominate, depending on who controls it and why. The pattern is not accidental. Progress amplifies human intention. It magnifies values already present. Where greed exists, progress expands greed's reach. Where compassion exists, progress extends compassion's impact. Technology itself is neutral. Civilization is not. The moral character of a society determines whether advancement becomes a bridge or a weapon. Throughout history, moments of greatest advancement have demanded the greatest ethical reckoning. The printing press challenged authority. Electricity reshaped labor. The internet redefined truth. Each breakthrough forced humanity to confront not what it could do, but what it should do. Violence often filled the gap between capability and wisdom. Civilizations that failed to manage this tension collapsed under their own contradictions. Those that endured learned, imperfectly and painfully, to place limits on power. Laws emerged to restrain violence. Norms developed to protect the vulnerable. These measures were never permanent, never complete. They required constant renewal. Progress did not eliminate brutality, it merely changed its form. The story of civilization is therefore not a simple ascent. It is a struggle to align advancement with humanity's better instincts every generation inherits. Tools shaped by the past and choices that will shape the future. Progress arrives quickly. Wisdom arrives slowly. Violence waits patiently in the space between them, ready to fill it whenever restraint falters, whenever fear overcomes empathy, whenever power is pursued without responsibility, whenever humanity forgets that its greatest inventions reveal not only what it can build, but what it is willing to destroy. Civilization is often described as an achievement, something humanity has built and secured, a permanent structure rising above the chaos of nature. Yet history tells a different story. Civilization is not a finished monument. It is a fragile arrangement, renewed or undone by the choices people make every day. Laws, institutions, and technologies give the appearance of permanence, but beneath them lies a delicate moral agreement that power will be restrained, that life will have value, that the strong will not endlessly exploit the weak. From the beginning, civilization has depended on cooperation beyond immediate self-interest. People agreed to follow shared rules to limit personal freedom in exchange for collective security. This bargain worked only when enough people believed it was fair. When trust eroded, when systems served only a few, civilization weakened from within. Collapse rarely arrived suddenly. It crept in through apathy, corruption, and the quiet normalization of injustice. Every society has faced moments when its values were tested. Scarcity, fear, and uncertainty reveal the true priorities of a civilization. In times of crisis, moral choices become clearer and more difficult. Who is protected? Who is sacrificed? Who is heard? Who is ignored? These decisions determine whether civilization bends toward dignity or cruelty. Progress alone cannot answer these questions. Technology does not provide ethics. Wealth does not guarantee justice. Civilization survives only when people choose restraint over impulse and responsibility over convenience. History shows that the greatest threats to civilization often come not from external enemies, but from internal decay. When institutions lose legitimacy, when truth becomes negotiable, when power operates without accountability, the more fabric phrase. People stop believing that the system represents them. Cynicism replaces commitment. Obedience replaces participation. Civilization begins to hollow out, still standing, still functioning, but increasingly empty of shared purpose. The illusion of permanence is one of civilization's most dangerous comforts. Empires once believed themselves eternal. Their ruins now lie scattered across deserts and forests, reminders that complexity does not equal durability. Roads crumble, laws are forgotten, languages die. What remains is the record of choices made, moments when societies chose domination over justice or exclusion over belonging. Civilization does not collapse because people stop building. It collapses because people stop caring. Moral choice is not dramatic most of the time. It is made in ordinary moments. Whether to tell the truth, whether to challenge cruelty, whether to see others as human or as obstacles. These small decisions accumulate, shaping institutions and norms over generations. No civilization collapses in a single act of betrayal. It erodes through countless acts of indifference. The tension between order and freedom lies at the heart of every civilization. Too much order becomes tyranny. Too much freedom becomes chaos. Balancing the two requires constant negotiation, empathy, and humility. It requires accepting that no system is perfect and that correction is a sign of strength, not weakness. Civilizations that refuse to adapt in the name of tradition often preserve form while losing meaning. Justice is the measure by which civilizations are ultimately judged, both by history and by their own people. Not justice as an abstract ideal, but justice as lived experience. Do laws protect the vulnerable or entrench privilege? Does prosperity lift many or enrich few? Are voices heard or silenced? These questions define the moral health of a society more than its wealth or military power. Civilization also depends on memory. Forgetting past failures makes repeating them easier. Remembering suffering creates responsibility. When history is distorted or erased, moral choice becomes unmoored from consequence. Myths replace lessons. Pride replaces reflection. A civilization that cannot face its own past cannot guide its future with clarity. Education plays a central role in sustaining civilization's moral core, not merely the transmission of skills, but the cultivation of judgment, teaching people how to think, how to question, how to empathize. A society that educates only for productivity risks creating efficient systems without conscience. Civilization you hire citizens, not just workers. Diversity tests civilization's moral strength. The presence of difference forces societies to decide whether belonging is conditional or universal. Fear of the unfamiliar has fueled exclusion, persecution, and violence throughout history. Yet civilizations that learned to expand their definition of us grew more resilient. Inclusion is not merely ethical, it is practical. Societies that draw from many perspectives adapt better to change. The modern world magnifies the stakes of moral choice. Global connectivity means decisions made in one place ripple outward. Environmental degradation, economic inequality, and technological power transcend borders. Civilization is no longer local. Responsibility is shared across humanity. The challenge is not whether civilization can advance, but whether it can do so without consuming the conditions that sustain it. Power, when unchecked, always tempts civilization toward moral shortcuts. Efficiency over fairness, security over freedom, growth over sustainability. These choices often appear reasonable in isolation, even necessary. Over time, they accumulate into systems that contradict the very values civilization claims to uphold. Moral erosion rarely announces itself. It presents as pragmatism. Hope remains because civilization has repeatedly shown the capacity for renewal. Movements for rights, dignity, and justice emerge when moral contradictions become unbearable. Ordinary people insist that systems reflect human values rather than suppress them. Change is slow, uneven, and often resisted, but it arises from the same source that created civilization in the first place. the human capacity to imagine a better way of living together. Civilization is not guaranteed by history nor protected by progress. It exists only as long as people choose to sustain it through ethical action. Every generation inherits structures built by others, along with the responsibility to decide what they will preserve, what they will reform, and what they will refuse to accept. Civilization survives not because it is strong, but because enough people, often quietly and without recognition, continue to choose humanity over domination, conscience over comfort, responsibility over indifference day after day, within systems that are always one moral failure away from unraveling.